Hello and welcome to another CEO Masterclass webinar. We've got over 100 business leaders and entrepreneurs on the call with us today. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Graham Freeman. I'm one of the co-founders of Freeman Clark. We are the largest and most experienced team of IT leaders in the world. We work on a fractional and flexible basis for our clients. We focus exclusively on mid-market businesses. We're completely unbiased and independent. We help our clients grow and innovate, automate and increase profits and reduce risk. Any mid-sized business that's been around for a few years will have developed ways of working, systems, processes and tech. The business changes, the business evolves, people change, suppliers change, and of course tech moves on. And after a while, these legacy situations build up and they start to cast a shadow over the business and become a leadership challenge. And that's what we're talking about today for the next hour. I'm joined by three of my colleagues, and by Emma Pownall from Daytel. Daytel are a leading Sage reseller in the UK, working with over 1,000 clients, and Emma is a senior leader who works with CEOs to turn aging systems and processes into opportunities for business growth. Let me just start by going around the table and asking, what's the worst example of legacy systems you've seen, or something that's been consigned to the bin that was actually fine? Let me just start. Christine, what do you think?
Well, I think I've got to talk about an example from sometime last summer, shortly after the M&S cyber attack that everybody will remember. And I was speaking to a significant clothing manufacturer who supplied M&S with men's clothing. And I was absolutely stunned to find that they were still using a system that had been out of support for 11 years, a system called JD Edwards. And they didn't see any impetus to change that. It was absolutely incredible. So there was huge risk in that they were obviously using a legacy system, but an even bigger risk that they were a cyber risk to Marks and Spencers in themselves.
Yeah, indeed. And I think we're seeing quite a lot of flow down from both the M&S issue and indeed the Jaguar Land Rover issue, turning into clients having been subjected to scrutiny they weren't before. Amy.
Okay, so I think my example is from a previous client who had a number of different legacy systems, but the bigger issue was that they had a lot of custom code that was sat around those systems, ultimately acting as an integration layer. That code was built 10, 15 years ago, hadn't been noted, wasn't in code repositories, and they had tried a number of times to get that supported by various third parties. They tried to recruit internal resources and upskill them to be able to support it. And in the end, and what carried on for a while, was that actually they outsourced the support of that to somebody who'd actually left the business 5, 6 years previous, was in retirement, and was keeping the lights on for them. And that was a major business risk and something that ultimately they couldn't carry on with.
Yeah. Michael.
So my example was from when I was a CTO of a B2C retail company. The point of sale systems that existed in the business as a result of a merger were 20 years out of support, using a system called Southware, notable only by being mentioned in the film The Matrix. The problem with the system was the fact that it was so old-fashioned, green screen, arcane sort of keystrokes to even do the simplest of things. It always frustrated new joiners, who would take months to get up to speed. And in exit interviews, when people left the business, it was always cited as one of the reasons why they left, because it was just such a frustrating system to use.
And that's a good example of how these things can become really strategic. Emma.
Hi, Graham. Thank you for inviting me to join you today. So my example is a private equity-backed business that knew that their system was going end of life, so had a runway for that, but had failed to tell their investor. So once the investor found out that there was a sunlight due, they weren't happy that it was a surprise to them and hadn't been a surprise to the tech team there. So caused a whole host of problems and a big panic to move off that system as quickly as possible, because it had cyber essentials challenges once it due to go end of life and all sorts of other risks.
Well, insurance, I guess, is the on. And interesting that didn't come out in the due diligence, I guess.
I think the solution had gone end of life after the investor had taken on the business, but they had failed to let
Yeah.
them know once it was announced.
Okay, so look, let's get into the first kind of section of this. And the question that we're trying to ask is, from a leadership point of view, this is a complicated problem. Almost every business at some level suffers from this. So how does a leader decide when it's time to move on? How does a leader assess the scale of this issue? What are the questions a leader should be asking? So Michael, do you want to take us through that area?
Sure. And I think the important thing is that not all old systems must be replaced, but I think there are key indicators when the time is up for some of these systems. And I like to use the acronym GRIP, so get a grip. The first letter, G, is for growth. So, has growth in your business stalled? And is that because of inefficient processes and systems? So you need to consider whether systems are a cause of how well you are performing as a business. And also, I think you need to consider future growth. So in the event of a merger or acquisition, as Emma and Graham were saying before, we need to very often undertake a due diligence piece. And that's not just about looking at the financial books, it's also about looking at the tech estate as well. So if a buyer came and looked at your tech estate, would they find all sorts of dragons be here? So I think it's really important to ask yourselves those questions. Are there systems which are entirely undocumented? Like Amy was saying, are there systems completely out of support, like Christine was saying?
Can I just chip in there? Because one of the things which I feel I've seen quite a lot is where process system issues can impact growth in a very subtle way, that they damage people's willingness, their bravery to go out and win business. That a sales function can be significantly kind of damaged because they fear that what they sell won't be delivered. And the real root cause of that is that there's legacy systems, legacy processes, that there's legacy in the delivery area because it's complicated and difficult, and because often, the leadership don't associate themselves with it. And what that actually does is it damages the willingness of salespeople to go out and win deals.
That's a great point, Graham. For more information on that, there's something called Conway's Law, which basically states that the technology estate of a business directly reflects its organizational culture and estate as well. So I think it's really important.
Sorry, I interrupted you. Carry on.
No, that's fine. That was a good aside. So in the GRIP mentality, R is for risk. And I think there's an awful lot of aspects of risk that you should probably consider. Are your systems out of support? Are they old? Are they reliant on skills that are, ancient? COBOL being one example from my recent past, actually. So I think you need to ask yourself, what are the risk areas in this technology estate? And I think it's also important to say that old systems will fail more frequently. And when they fail, they become bigger failures because they will have grown into the system. So I think not only is the likelihood more is higher, but also the blast radius of any issue is also greater. So again, that's certainly worth considering. And then obviously what we talk about, myself and my colleagues talk a lot about, as Christine alluded to, is cyber. So cyber attacks are much more likely for older systems. So you need to really look carefully to see whether your systems are secure from attacks.
Can I jump in on that one, actually,
Sure.
Michael? One of the things that I often find is that increasingly customers and clients are asking businesses to provide assurances on the kind of cybersecurity standards, whether that's ISO 27001, whether it's things like Cyber Essentials. And the reality is that it's quite difficult to get those accreditations on some of these older systems. And that puts a huge amount of risk against those businesses, because if they aren't able to get those accreditations, they could be losing large clients. And that needs to be factored into the case for change, but because ultimately, if the business can't keep those clients because they have these standards, then they've got to look at the technology. And in some cases, it can be upgraded, it can be changed, you can change your processes to get around that. But in a lot of instances, unfortunately, you do have to really take a hard look and make changes and change those systems and the processes, obviously.
Yeah, great point, Amy. Absolutely. So in the GRIP mentality, I is for innovation. So obviously a lot of what we talk about here in Freeman Clarke and obviously Emma at Daytel is talking about AI and cool and groovy new technologies. The problem with those technologies is they only work when you connect them with other things. They need to be connected, integrated, they need to have data, they need to push data. So the question you need to ask yourself is, are we able to use those new technologies? Are we able to plug them into our existing estate? Are there files and reports that make that connection very difficult, for example? And the other aspect of innovation is to look over your shoulder. So what are your competitors doing? Are they taking on the mantle of AI and therefore accelerating their growth as a result? So you need to consider both of those aspects. And I always like to think of data in a business is like the blood within our body. It carries all the nutrients, it does all of the good stuff. So consider whether data is able to flow freely to provide that innovation.
I think the impact of legacy ways of working on innovation is quite subtle, isn't it? It's quite insidious. It's often difficult to understand why your business isn't as innovative as you want it to be. It's difficult to draw a straight line, perhaps, between the fact that you've got old systems and so on, and that. But actually, that is the underlying reason why people can't experiment, why people can't try out, and why you lack the agility that you're looking for.
Absolutely.
Mm.
And that agility is very much part of the final indicator, which is P for performance. So, the systems that you have, the systems and the processes that you have in place now were designed at a time when your business was very different. It might have been 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago. And while you may have added on new capabilities or made some enhancements, the data models will probably be the same. The core business processes and functions will probably be the same. So in reality, a lot of your capability is still set 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago, and certainly doesn't reflect the business that you are now, let alone the business you want to become in 5, 10, 15, 20 years from now. So I think that's really important to consider. Are the systems able to give you that agility that Graham was referring to before? It's a huge source of frustration to people when they use systems and it's clunky, as my example previously alluded to. So consider all of those aspects as well. So I think the good thing about GRIP is it's relatively simple, but you need to ask yourselves the questions, in each of those indicators. If the answer comes back as yes, I think technology is holding us back with growth or risk or innovation or performance, then the likelihood is you would vastly benefit from a new solution, a new system to remove that legacy.
Okay, great. Growth, risk, innovation, performance. And I guess the underlying those things, Emma, was it you before that mentioned morale, for want of a better word? The effect of old stuff on your ability to recruit and retain key talent. And every chief exec I talk to talks about the importance of talent. Okay, right. So I've got a grip. Let's go on to the next question, though, which is why is this so hard? Why do companies get stuck? What are the barriers to solving these problems? Why is this something that warrants us having a webinar about it rather than something that people can fix easily? Emma, can you take us away?
Yeah, I think, even just from a business leader lens, we all have businesses to run. and we have to keep the wheels moving. And often that takes priority over everything else. So when it comes to legacy tech, and particularly if it's quite old legacy, that view of, well, how do we solve this problem as well as keeping the business moving can often be a real barrier to thinking about it. And, you know, we might all, or when you've got legacy tech, you can see that it's stalling innovation, or people have got loads of workarounds or challenges with reporting and insights, or, you know, cyber. But it's then, how do we do both? How do we keep moving forward? And that can often put people in a freeze mode, that they just keep going a little bit longer, and it just gets bigger and bigger problem.
I think the little bit longer is exactly the point, isn't it? If this had a very clear edge, you know, if you think about the Millennium Bug or something, for those of us old enough to remember it, or forthcoming Q Day or whatever, then there's a cliff edge there, and everyone's got to make a decision. But these things creep up on you, don't they?
Yeah, definitely. I think when it doesn't creep up is when, like we were saying before, things like Cyber Essentials accreditations or ISO accreditations, you know, suddenly bring some urgency. But often with these, particularly with the more peripheral elements of legacy tech, you don't really have to change them. There's not a critical event that's pushing you towards. So then that little bit longer can go a little bit longer and cause more, I think, hidden challenges for businesses.
I would say from my experience, one of the things that kind of really causes problems is that it's seen as a technology problem. And it is seen as something that the technology team in isolation need to resolve, create a roadmap for, and then deliver and implement. But ultimately, this is a business problem from my perspective. And often within a business, they don't have the right people that can talk both the business language as well as the technology language. And also, often technology doesn't have a seat at the table, whether that's at the board, whether that's at the executive committee. And that actually means that the technology team is blindsided. They don't see all of the challenges that these kinds of systems are actually bringing to the business. So my advice is always to make sure that you have clear ownership, both within the technology team, obviously that they definitely play a part, but clear ownership across the business of all of your systems, all of your business processes, and have key owners that take accountability for making sure that those systems and processes are as good as they can be. But then also making sure that technology has broad access to the business at a senior level, so that they're having conversations about what's working well and what doesn't, so you can identify what are the opportunities, which really helps to then build a business case for changing these systems. It's not just about the fact that they might cause you cyber issues or they're going end of life. It's actually then about what can we bring to the table by making these changes.
Go on, sorry, Christine. Yeah.
So I was going to say, when I'm out actually talking to clients, I think I'm hearing the same stuff as Amy, but I'm hearing two slightly different nuances, and that's because perhaps we're at the very start of the conversation at that point in my role. And I think the two things I'm hearing are, firstly, we've never done this before. This is our core system. This is way too frightening to do it by ourselves. We've had this system 10, 15 years. We've never changed it. We don't have the in-house skills to make a change on this scale. What if it goes wrong? Our business will go underneath. So there's this huge fear of, we don't know how to do it, so we'll just hang on to it for a bit longer, to speak to Emma's earlier point. So the flip side of that is that the other reason not to change is cost. So let's put it on the table. It's the elephant in the room. Technology costs money. What actually happens is that if you've had a legacy system for 10 or 15 years, you're no longer depreciating it on your books as an asset anymore. It's likely to cost you very little to support. It may even not have a support contract anymore. So you've had what I actually call a depreciation holiday. You've not actually had to spend any money on technology. And all of a sudden, you've got this double pain of, I'm having to pay now and to catch up. So there's a huge element of, don't get into that position in the first place. Technology is an ongoing cost within the business, and managing it and reacting sooner actually prevents that becoming a huge cost in the business.
I mean, to that point, one of the questions that we've got here is from Andrew Marks, who we know well, LDC. Hello, Andrew. Thank you for joining us. LDC are one of the largest private equity investors in the mid-market in the UK. And he's asking us about how you build a business case to replace old technology that's not costing anything. You know, it's a bit like the business case to replace an old car that's basically not costing you anything. It's a problem. How do you go about constructing those business cases, Michael?
So I've just gone through this exercise with one of my clients now, and it's actually all about identifying the opportunity cost of things that are taking place in the business. The business is running absolutely fine, but for example, there might be one person whose job it is to manually process data into a spreadsheet in order to manage inventory across the business. Or in the case of the production facility, there is two people who are taking handwritten notes from the factory floor and typing them in. And actually, these are areas of huge inefficiency. And so by writing a business case on the basis of saying, you know, this is essentially valueless work, it's an opportunity cost, and then identifying all of those areas right the way across the business, both as intangible things like I've described, but also tangible things like, well, we can turn off that server, we can stop using quite so much storage for these systems, for example. You build together a business case, which very often, you know, has a payback period in a relatively short time.
I think what often makes this really complicated is those workarounds you were talking about. Because inevitably, what happens, the way the story unfolds, is that as things change, companies, teams, people develop workarounds. And they may not call them workarounds or see them as workarounds. They may feel that they are working with what they've got, you know. So they don't. Often this stuff doesn't even feel like a problem. But you've got layers and layers and layers of people doing things that are really questionable. But the one thing you would say about this is it's really, really complicated. It's very difficult to have a conversation about what's going on in this business. You know, a mid-sized business can be just as complicated, in my experience, as an enterprise business, with many different people doing all kinds of things. So it becomes extremely difficult to see how do we get from here to there. It becomes very difficult to plot that course. As Christine was saying, this company, you know, won't do this very often, once every 5 years, 10 years or whatever. And it is, I think, to Amy's point, of course we would say this is a leadership gap. This is about a person having a vision for how this should all work, and plotting a course, and then making sure that the company's moving forward on that course. Okay, listen, let's kind of just switch gears a little bit for a couple of minutes. We've got 3 examples here of quick conversation point. So the question is keep or kill, right? The question is keep or kill. So I'm just going to give you 3 quick scenarios. The first one is a customer database that marketing hates. Marketing hates it. Sales refuse to abandon it. Keep or kill. How would you approach this problem, Michael?
First of all, understand why marketing hates it. Is it because they haven't gone through relevant training? Is it actually a perfectly serviceable piece of software, but it's actually just because they don't know how to use it? Is it configured correctly for their processes? Were they consulted when it was initially implemented, or was it just implemented for the sales team? So I think there's a whole raft of things before we go to the nuclear option of let's replace it with something else. I think we need to get to the understanding of what is it that is not working for all of the relevant stakeholders.
This is a stupid game. I know this. I know that's what you said. Amy, keep or kill, please. The customer database that marketing hates but sales refuse to abandon.
I'm going to sit on the fence as well. It depends.
Yeah.
I think you've got to make sure it's compliant, that it's a customer database. It's got to be in line with all of the relevant legislation. You've got to have a system that is easy to update and maintain. If that's why marketing hate it, then that is an issue and needs to be looked at. And it's got to work for everybody. So I'm kind of with Michael on this one, to be honest.
Okay, let's move on. 20-year-old ERP that works, but only 2 people understand it. Emma.
I'm going to have to say kill on this one, but I think it comes down to that business critical system, and you know the risk that only 2 people being able to do anything with it brings.
Have you ever seen this, just out of interest?
Yeah, we have
Just a few times, yeah.
definitely seen it many times over. Normally, once businesses are moving to something that is better supported.
Yeah. Christine, any thoughts on this one?
Oh, absolutely. You've got to kill it, and you've got to come up with a really good plan to kill it. It's a huge risk. You've only got two people able to support it. Anything could happen to either of those two people. The risk is just phenomenal to the business.
Okay, let me give you the last one, because I actually think this kind of stuff is surprisingly common. A huge finance spreadsheet used for monthly board reporting that probably works, but it's too big to validate. Amy.
You keep giving me the ones where I'm going to sit on the fence. So what I would say is, I think there's a misconception that Excel and spreadsheets shouldn't exist anymore. I think there's a real value in still having spreadsheets in certain circumstances, right? So I wouldn't kill it just because it's a spreadsheet. But you have to make sure that you've got accurate and up-to-date data, particularly when it is being relied upon from a senior leadership level to presumably make really key business decisions. Okay, so the first thing I would do is actually validate, what's the purpose of this spreadsheet? Where's the data coming from? Is that data accurate? Work out, how is that spreadsheet working? And this is really common in what I see, that somebody built a spreadsheet 5-10 years ago, coming back to Michael's point, when the business model was probably very different, and nobody knows how it works. So figure out what it's doing, document it so that you don't have this problem in a year's time, 2 years' time. And look, if it works for the people that need to use it, if it's giving them the insights, if it's accurate, then actually I don't see a problem with that at all. But at the same time, evaluate if there's a better way of doing it, right? Nice, snazzy dashboards in something like Power BI, they're more visually attractive, they're easier to use, you can slice and dice data in a much more visual way. But that's not necessarily replacing that spreadsheet. That could just be a layer on top.
Yeah, Michael, anything to add?
I was going to say, I'll just add to that and totally agree with everything Amy says. I just add to that, very often those spreadsheets, and again, I'm talking from personal experience with one of my clients right now, where to calculate the margin report takes somebody in finance 2 weeks to create that process. So yes, spreadsheets are not necessarily something to be absolutely got rid of, but the business issue is it's taking us 2 weeks to know when we've got a margin problem. Wouldn't it be great if we had a near real time, or at least on a daily basis, something that we can rely on, which gives us that information?
So I know we need to move on, but can I just add here a couple of things, because I couldn't agree more with that example. I think we see that a lot, and I think the reason a lot of people often get in touch with us is when they eventually realize that there are people in the finance team spending weeks working stuff out on spreadsheets. And this is often how the legacy problem expresses itself, because everyone effectively works around and solves the problem, and it turns into people in the finance team. But for those people doing that, they think that's their job. They think that's okay. And it's not apparent that this is a waste of time. And it also is perhaps, and we all know that this, business is family, that's the truth. It's difficult to confront the fact that there are people who are doing jobs that are not adding value. So it's a complicated problem. And how do you see your way from where we are now to where we want to be? That's a leadership challenge. Christine, go ahead.
I was actually just going to say, I have a current client who came to us with exactly this problem. And so they will need to remain nameless, and I need to be careful what I say. So they came to us and said, we have a spreadsheet. It is at the core of some business reporting that has to go to a third party. It has reached a stage where the spreadsheet is unreliable, unmanageable, and has too many rows, and we don't quite know what to do. And can we just layer on top of it? We are now heading to a transaction, and we know we're going to be in trouble when it comes to due diligence. So that was a really interesting challenge for them. They knew they had to fix this. They couldn't carry on. That was the catalyst, the forthcoming transaction. So we worked with them and actually did a pretend due diligence, Graham. And you know what? We were able to highlight where the root was coming from, as Amy highlighted. What's the root cause of this? Why are we using this spreadsheet? And identify a much better way of doing it that was going to be fully acceptable going through that process.
Okay, let's move on. we've talked about the difficulty, we've talked about the issue, we've talked about the downside, but ultimately there is also another side to this equation, which is about opportunity. So, Amy, can you talk about how you turn these things into opportunity? But can you? I just want to make reference to a question from Nikki, chief exec of a third sector organisation, and her questions about replacing CRM systems which are outdated. But what's interesting about it is the question is, what should we be looking for in the new system in terms of its integration with our website and e-commerce and so on and so on? Because her point there is about what's the new opportunity rather than just what's the problem I'm confronted with. So, Amy, can you talk about how you move from one way of thinking to the other?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I could talk about opportunities all day, to be perfectly honest. I think there's a misconception that changing your systems, changing your processes is really expensive. It'll take up everybody's time and it'll destabilize the business. And absolutely, there's a bit of truth in that. But I think it's about looking at what are the opportunities that also brings, right? So in my experience, there are kind of key three things that come up time and again. So one is that actually, sometimes there is an opportunity to reduce your operating costs. And that's not the case in all businesses. And as Christine mentioned earlier, there are some businesses that actually have not been paying any costs for these systems. But in a lot of businesses, because of the fact that the technology is old, it takes a lot of time and effort to support. There are expensive contracts for specific skills that maybe aren't readily available in the market anymore. Sometimes there are kind of niche parts of this that just cost a huge amount of money. There's also the fact that sometimes you only have a few people that actually really understand it. And so things take a long time to do because there's a big backlog that is sat with just a small amount of people. So in a recent client of mine, when we sat down and looked at what do you pay for these systems today compared to what you would pay for off-the-shelf kind of big tech solutions, we found that across the board, they were saving at least 20% off their operating costs. So here I'm talking about licenses, infrastructure, hosting, support costs, all of that kind of stuff. But actually, in some cases, it was 70% cheaper. And actually, the payback was less than 6 months. So there's definitely a piece there. Don't assume that actually it's going to cost us more, both in terms of the implementation, but also the ongoing costs, because that's not always the case. Okay, so that's kind of number one. The other is it gives you a huge opportunity to review your business model. As we've talked about a few times already, a lot of these systems were built for a business model that was 5, 10, 20 years old. And what you don't want to do is just take those processes and those ways of working and just apply them to a new set of systems. It gives you the opportunity to take a step back, look at your business, and work out, are we doing things in a way that we want to be doing them going forwards? Are there new opportunities for us going forwards? So to give you an example from a previous company that I worked with, they were a property management company. They predominantly sold facilities management services. But actually, when they took a step back and they looked at what they were going to get with a new set of systems, they realized that they could actually commercialize some of the technology within that new environment. And they then began selling a data and analytics service to their clients, which made it easier for them as a business to actually do their core business, but then also gave their clients an added benefit. Okay. The third thing I'd mention is the ability to reduce your overheads. And we've talked about this a little bit already. There will often be a lot of manual work that's being done in those systems today. There's duplication of effort. There's people who are sat there moving data manually from one system to another. And actually, you can save a huge amount of your operating costs within, and I'm talking people costs here, by automating tasks, by using AI, just by having a better process, you can remove a lot of that cost. And that is actually something that could just go to your bottom line to reduce costs, or you could redeploy those resources to more value add tasks. And then the kind of opportunity is limitless in a way, because you can redeploy them to look at new business models, to look at new areas, to improve customer service, to spend more time on sales or whatever. And those are the kind of key three things that I've seen a lot in terms of where you can get the opportunity. So coming to Nikki's question very briefly, because I haven't covered it yet and I apologise. What are the key things to look for in replacing a CRM? And she's also mentioned about having e-com platforms, etc. So the benefit of having new modern systems, particularly from big tech companies, is that often those systems will play in an environment with others. So that's one of the key things that I would look for. Look for systems that can play well with others. Look for systems where there's a huge amount of investment being put into those systems in AI, because then you don't have to worry about those things. But also make sure that you're bringing everybody along with you. So there is a lot of anxiety around changing these, and that's where change management really comes in, making sure that you've got buy-in across the business and getting lots of people involved.
Okay, I mean, very comprehensive answer.
Yes, sorry, I
no, absolutely, 100% right. I mean, the only thing I was going to just build on, because I think we see it all the time, is this point about refocusing on clients and what they consider to be valuable. Sorry, I'm going back to the question of the opportunity. I mean, typically, for any company really, you know, on day one, you're all about the client, but by year 5, you're embroiled with your own problems and internal issues and so on and so on and so on, and a lot of your time is spent trying to solve those things. This is an opportunity to start again and say, what is it that our clients value? What is it that matters? Why do we win? Why do people pay for our service or products or whatever? And to start again from there.
Yeah, that is a point of you know, it's an inflection point of business transformation. And as Amy absolutely rightly says, you know, yes, it's a technology change, but ultimately it is a business problem. It's a business project, and this is an opportunity to change the way you do things in your business.
Yeah, I would also add to that it doesn't have to be a massive, painful big bang. And I think people who are coming from legacy solutions, they probably come from big, cumbersome projects that take ages to get live. And actually, the way technology is set up today, the fact, like Amy said, that things speak to each other, there's a more evolutionary approach that business can take. And so we often advise, think about what your day one value is. Like, what do you really need to fix and change? Get to that point and then work on an evolutionary approach so that you can maximize value while bringing people on the journey, while maximizing technology. And actually, you don't need it all to be ready on day one. We often see really big requirements documents that there's hundreds of lines of, it must do all of these things. That's often not reality for day one. So which of the 100 lines is going to bring you the most value from day one, and work from there?
So this is an interesting area. Can I just ask a little bit about people's thoughts on this? So if I'm chief exec of a business, how do I provide the leadership in this space to ensure that we develop our plans and develop our thinking in a realistic and incremental and evolutionary way, rather than allow it to be the case that a document is created that's got hundreds and hundreds of lines of mandatory requirements, and then this just turns into a gigantic big bang project? What should I as a leader do to prevent that from happening?
I think for me, when I've seen this work really well, is it's about having that really clear vision and a culture to drive the business in, you know, that in the direction of that vision. And I often refer to people used to refer to it as minimum viable products, but I often refer to it as minimum lovable products. And that's all about distilling down, exactly like Emma says, it's about distilling down this 100,000 requirement document into, no, what do you really need? And to do that, you measure it against the vision of the business. Does that deliver that vision statement for us? If the answer is no, then maybe it's something that is optional or can come at a later date.
So the job of the leader, as you say, is to be clear on the vision and to make sure that the project is connected with the vision.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay. I think there's another point in there, Graham, and I think where the leader has got to be clear and strong is not just to have a vision, but to be able to take his company and people on that journey to say, we are going to adopt new ways. We are not going to implement a system in the image of our previous system because we've always done it like that. We are going to be open to change, open to embracing new processes. We look at the software industry that spend billions of pounds on R&D, on new products. And they've looked at what is best process, what is best practice, what are enterprise size clients doing? Can our mid-market clients adopt those processes and practices? And we want entrepreneurs and CEOs to think like that. And that's what makes for a successful project.
And I have to say, I hope that is what we bring to our clients, 100%. So, Christine, can we stay with you? And can we go on to this difficult question, which is that we're talking about this as if it's a problem which takes a long time to develop. The truth is that everything becomes legacy the day after. So how do you prevent this from happening in the first place? How do you avoid the cycle repeating? How do you avoid, we've had this thing, we've solved the problem with something new, and then we're just starting the same cycle again? What steps should the leader take to avoid that from happening?
So I think in the first place is to have a strategy and a plan. So rather than just going into this project blindside and just hope for the best, have a plan, have a strategy. Are the things I'm going to put in place strategic, robust, and long term? And what will they look like after a period of 10 years? And I guess a great example here is if you go with SaaS product, software as a service, where it's implemented on someone else's infrastructure, and you are just subscribing to use it, then they're going to take the overhead of keeping that up to date and keeping that current. So that no longer is a problem for you. You've just got to make sure you continue to use that product. It's going to stay up to date. There will be lots of things surrounding that product that are perhaps more tactical than strategic, and that's absolutely fine too. You've got to think about those tactical things might have a shorter shelf life. How are you going to replace them? Will they be replaced when RPA becomes, robotic process automation gets replaced by a piece of AI? And it's having a strategic plan around that and going into those decisions with your eyes open to make sure that you don't fall into this legacy position again.
Yeah, and just to add to what Christine said, that's all absolutely correct. And I think the important point is to talk about the processes around this, is how you're supporting, managing, enhancing anything from the day of go live beyond, to 1 year, 2 year, 5 year afterwards. So having those teams in place, the processes, how are you going to deal with change? How do you deal with new technology? And that is ultimately all about the technology strategy, which is, what we do day in, day out with our clients.
I couldn't agree more. I think, as you said, it's about having the things in place so that evolution becomes normal, and having ownership of this stuff, and that the owner has a seat at the table, to use the phrase that I think it was Amy used right back at the beginning of the conversation, so that when the business is changing, those changes don't get kind of addressed in yet another new spreadsheet, that actually they are properly addressed, the necessary process changes made, the necessary system changes are made, the necessary organizational changes are made, whatever it is, so that all the time the business remains fit for purpose, rather than there being a gradual slide into problems and then a big shock when there's a realization that this is becoming a drag on the business. I hate to use the kind of governance word, but I do think that this is a question of governance, isn't it?
Yeah, I completely agree. I think a lot of businesses will set up a transformation project or program to deliver change, but that's great, that's fine, but that needs to then become a culture. I'm kind of saying the same thing that Michael said, but I think the key thing for me is that it needs to be a joint endeavor between a technologist who is looking to the future around what technology advances are coming, what are the products and services that are being provided by technology companies, what are those areas that we should be looking at going forwards. But then there needs to be a person or people within the business that take ownership of looking both internally at how does the business do things, what are the processes it follows, but then also looking at the market, their market. So what are our competitors doing? What are other people doing? And together, bringing that into a roadmap that is consistently evolving and changing. I think gone are the days of the kind of 3-5 year roadmaps where you knew exactly what you were going to be doing. And it needs to be more agile. And that is a cultural change it is about governance and process. I absolutely agree with you, but it has to be a cultural step change, and the expectation has to be set that this isn't just a one-time thing, that we set these systems live and then we'll look at them again in 3 or 5 years' time. It needs to be a cultural change to consistently look and improve and innovate.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think it also is about the leadership team all taking ownership of this. So we work a lot with finance leaders, and they're pushing their finance strategy and their tech, what tech they want to use in finance forward. I'm a marketer. I've got my marketing view of what tech I want to use. Actually, it should be a continual boardroom conversation about how we all utilize tech, and we all align what we're doing with that business strategy, so it doesn't just become IT's problem or the CTO's problem, because all of us need tech as business leaders to move each of our areas forward, and we all have to take ownership of that.
So this is interesting, isn't it? Because I mean, and I completely agree. We start at the beginning of the conversation. I was at pains to say, you know, this is a strategic issue, but actually, what we're saying is really this is a cultural issue, and I think we're right. It is a cultural issue. The strategy isn't going to be right unless the culture's right. And you know, if you have a culture of leaving all these things untended to gather dust and become problems, and then every so often you have a transformation and then you start the cycle again, well, that's a cultural problem, isn't it? But just before we move on, would anyone like to talk about where they've seen this done really well?
I would say it's really difficult to get 100% right. I have seen in a couple of clients or companies that I've worked with previously where they've really got certain projects right, certain pieces right. So what I would say is look at what has worked well historically and work out what did you do differently there compared to what you're doing in the future. But also be prepared to fail sometimes, and that's okay, but learn the lessons and make sure you regroup quickly, and then make sure you kind of move forwards. In the ones for me that I've seen that have worked well, it is all about having a really good level of participation from a really big cross-section of the business. And that's right from the top to right to the bottom, okay? And it is about making sure you're communicating about what you're doing, making sure you're getting people involved. Because often where I've seen it not working so well, it's because actually there's been a big gotcha at a certain point because something was missed. And those gotchas tend to be because we didn't consult the right groups of people and we focused at the top, or we focused on areas that were shouting the loudest. So that would be the thing that I would say really focus on.
That point, sorry, I know other people have got things, but that point about the people who are shouting the loudest is a really good one, actually, because that's often where it goes wrong. It's often where it goes wrong. Sorry, someone else was going to chip in there.
Yeah, I was going to chip in with a couple of things, actually, Graham, on this one. One of my favourite things to say to CEOs, just as we embark on a piece of work with them, is we're not going to do this to you. You've got to work with us. This is your business project. We're just the ambassador for technology who can make this happen for you. But it's all about the business making this happen. And I don't know if you're after a specific named example when you say, can we name somewhere where we've done this well? Well, I'm going to relate to one of our client stories. So this is all out in the public domain. And it's a large business called Neom Organics, which is hugely successful business. And they've been a client of ours for 5 or 6 years. And we've taken them through a huge transformation as they've gone through an incredible exponential growth curve and become, one of the leading wellbeing brands in the UK during that process, and moved into retail stores, and we have taken them on that journey. Now, it hasn't been perfect all the way, but we've actually run a huge transformation project that has gone incredibly well, to the point where our CIO in there has been recognised as one of the 100 best CIOs in the country based on the work that he's actually been doing at Neom Organics. And that's, sorry to plug it, it's all in the client story up on the website.
Michael, were you going to say something? Sorry, I wasn't sure. Yes, go ahead. Yeah,
just very briefly again, as we've been kind of circling around the debate, it is all about the culture, and one of the best examples of that was when I was CTO back for the B2C business I referred to earlier, and when we went through, we started on a transformation journey, not a project or program, on a transformation journey, and the CEO himself stood up in front of all of the key stakeholders and said, I want you to change everything and surprise no one. And I love that
Brilliant.
phrase because it just
Brilliant.
it typifies everything that we then subsequently did. So yeah, that's what a good transformation should look like.
Okay, so look, we've got 9 minutes to bring this to a landing. Let's look at some of the questions and answers that we've got in front of us. And I was just reading them a moment ago, thinking actually I hadn't really spotted how many of them are about AI. But if I look here at the question, there's a question from Paul, MD at a construction business about AI. There's a question from Anthony, head of product about AI. There's a question from Natalie, CEO at an education business about AI. We can't do a webinar. This is not supposed to be a webinar about AI. We're talking about AI. How would we connect these two topics?
I think they're massively interconnected because any business that wants to adopt AI, and most CEOs are asking for a business to think about how they're going to adopt AI, whether that's innovation or optimization, that if there's legacy systems in there, that's going to slow down that business because they're not going to talk to AI. Then your data's probably not in a place where AI can access it. And so actually getting the legacy system sorted is probably the first step to being able to have an AI strategy in place and think about that.
Yeah, I mean, it is unfortunately often the case that we're working with so many clients on AI, and that's often stymied by issues of legacy systems.
Yeah, so like I was saying in the grip analogy, data needs to flow through the business very readily, like blood. And if you don't have those integratable systems, then implementing AI, it's not impossible, but I don't think it'll deliver the sort of value you're expecting. But coming back to what I was saying before about what my former CEO said, the beauty of AI is that you can change everything. The problem is that you can surprise everybody, and that's the issue. So, and again, coming back to what Amy and you, Graham, were saying before, it is about having good process and good governance around it. And again, one of the businesses I'm working with at the moment, we're going through a number of different ideas, sort of proof of concept more often than not, as to how Claude Code in this case can build solutions that will help fix particular business problems. But there's a carefully controlled process before it becomes fully adopted and widely adopted. So I think the thing about legacy is if you're not careful and you don't control it, it just becomes yet another spreadsheet. That's all AI is. It's just a very, very clever spreadsheet. So you're not going to end up with 2,500 spreadsheets. You'll end up with 2,500 agents or 2,500 little bespoke projects or little code solutions. So again, we have to understand how to manage and govern and control those effectively without stymieing the innovation.
Yeah. I did see there's a really interesting question that someone's asked around when replacing legacy systems, given the speed in which AI is evolving, what are our thoughts about basically using AI to build in-house systems? It's a really interesting question, and I suspect it's one that lots of people have thought about. And actually, I was at an Oracle day a couple of months ago, and it was a kind of sales pitch to various people, and somebody in that session as well asked a very similar question. Look, everyone is going to have their own perspective on that question. My perspective is that particularly for small, medium businesses, that it is a lot to take on to go and build your own systems, whether helped and aided by AI or not. We've also seen that the speed in which AI is developing is increasing exponentially. And keeping up with that from a skills perspective in-house within an organization is going to be very challenging.
So there was one last question I wanted to go to, and that was I think a really challenging question, which was asked by Ed, who's MD of a professional services firm. And he said, when you're confronted by these really complicated situations, do you plan top down or bottom up? And I think it's a very insightful question, but it really is digging at part of the reason why this is so difficult, because I think that digs at the complexity problem that you're confronting in many cases with legacy systems. Any thoughts, top down or bottom up?
I'm happy to start with this one, Graham, and the answer for me is both. And if my rationale is that we always start by understanding where the business is going and what is the business trying to achieve. And that's sort of top down. And then looking at the current systems and saying, okay, where are the current systems at? What do they do? How do they work? And if we want to get to a stage where we're delivering what the business is talking about, what are the systems going to look like then? And that actually gives us a natural roadmap. How do we get from A to B? And we can map that out, and then we can sit down with the client and validate it and say, how do we go forward on this? Where are the priorities? Where is the biggest value? How are you realizing the benefits? And so it's that combination of top down. Yes, this is pie in the sky. Where do we want to get to? But then measured by looking at the realities of where you are today and what resources have you got to throw at this? How much time can you afford to spend on it? How much money can you afford to spend? So it's a combination of all of those factors.
Yeah, I agree with you. Anyone else want to add in?
And again, absolutely agree with Christine. The top-down bit is the vision we've been talking about, the vision, the culture, the direction, the strategy, and that needs to be clear and focused from the leadership perspective. The bottom-up is, what are the underlying problems? And then connecting the two is all about saying, is this problem something we actually want to be solving because it's actually part of our vision? And if the answer is no, then maybe we shouldn't be doing those things, or maybe we should be doing them slightly differently. So yes, it is about connecting top down and bottom up.
And then of course, together with that, the other challenge is, how do you kind of time limit those activities? Because you can, if you're going top down, find yourself in an endless re-strategizing conversation. And if you're going bottom up, in any kind of substantial, complicated business, there may be so much detail that you could write report after report after report, untangling all of the detail of all the issues, describing your current problem in a great deal of detail. And again, to what end? So there is a time boxing that has to be brought to this, a time boxing to the top down, a time boxing to the bottom up, and then there has to come a point where you say, right, now let's offer some potential ways forwards.
Yeah.
Okay, Christine, can I ask you in 60 seconds to talk about our IT assessment for growth and how we would move forward with a client who's got these kinds of issues?
So I've already started to talk about that really in answer to my last question. So our IT assessment for growth is very much what I've just said in terms of understanding the vision for the business, understanding what you do today, and how you're going to get there. Now, we can do that over, as Graham has already alluded to, a longer period. But this is a piece of work where we come in for a short period, maybe half a day, and come in and spend that time with you and get some real tangible outputs about, well, where are the issues? What do we think the direction of travel is? And what do we think the next steps are? So we just start to lift the hood on the problem a little bit in order to help a CEO start to understand what he needs to do next to address these problems. And we're happy to come out and do this IT assessment for growth with any of our prospective clients or people on this call.
Lovely. Okay, so please contact us for more information. I'm going to say thank you very much for all the panel. Thank you to the audience, and have a good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.